If you were to visit CascadiaPoeticsLab.org and click to the Poetry Postcard Fest page, you'd find the following blurb. The Poetry Postcard Fest is an annual 56-day experiment in spontaneity and community building. This literary event is a self-guided workshop in spontaneous composition where people sign up to send 31 original poems on postcards to folks on a participation list before the end of August. The fest was initiated in 2007 by poets Paul Nelson and Lana Ayers and has grown to include poets participating worldwide. It's a joy to talk to one of those initiators today, Paul E. Nelson, Dharma name Ryukan. He is the son of a labor activist father and Cuban immigrant mother from the west side of Chicago. He moved to King County, Washington in 1988 and has since founded the Cascadia Poetics Lab and its cornerstone event, the Cascadia Poetry Festival. He is a bioregional poet and master interviewer, having interviewed folks such as Brenda Hillman, Allen Ginsberg, Michael McClure, Joanne Kiger, and many more. He is a member of the Ishoji Soto Zen Temple in Rainier Beach, his neighborhood, a spiritual ecology practitioner and advocate for his neighbor Dukwukweb, Place of Loon, also called Mapes Creek, and a force on the spiritual plane as well as this one. He is the co-editor of the recently released Winter in America Again, Poets Respond to the 2024 Election, from Carbonation Press, Cascadian Zen Volumes 1 and 2 from Watershed Press, and 56 Days of August, Poetry Postcards, among others, and the author of many volumes of poetry, some of my favorites of which are Daysong Miracle, Past 62, from Carbonation Press in 2024, Haibun de la Serna from Goldfish Press in 2022, and A Time Before Slaughter from Apprentice House in 2020, and multiple volumes of interviews. Sam Hamill said, over the past decade or so, no one has done more for poetry in the Pacific Northwest than has Paul Nelson. With the Poetry Postcard Fest, now in its 19th year, that influence is spreading well beyond the Cascadia bioregion and all over the world. Hermano, as we sit alongside Lake Washington and Dukwukweb, I am humbled to chat with you about the Poetry Postcard Fest and its position in our current times.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. So as I said, the fest is turning 19, coming off its highest numbers yet last year. Tell me a little about the founding of the fest, its current Dharma position, if you will, and what you imagine for its future.
Before we started the Poetry Postcard Fest, I had been engaged in the 315 experiment for a few years. That came out of Naropa University, and Danica Dinsmore was the main person behind that. And she had some pretty high caliber collaborators, including Bernadette Mayer, among others. And they would wake up every August day at 3:15 a.m. or stay up till 3:15 a.m. and attempt to write from a state that's between sleeping and waking, hypnopompic and hypnagogic states, to try and get to a state beyond ego and see what you can rustle up from that position. And I did that for a few years. I found it difficult to be up at 3:15, so as August progressed, it became the 5:15 and the 8:15 and probably about the 9:15 by the end of the month, and it kind of left me somewhat ragged. And so the experiment stopped, or I stopped participating. But I like that idea of having the month of August to put poetry as a high priority in your life. The writing of it, the reading of it, the receiving of poems. Although the 315 experiment, we didn't really exchange until after it was over. But that's where the Postcard Fest came from. So Danica Dinsmore gets great credit. And then I was involved in that year. It was after we had closed the original Northwest Spoken Word Lab in Auburn at 14th South Division, but SPLAB activities were continuing at different places in Auburn. And I said to Lana, I want to do something this August with postcards. And she said, I'll help, which is, those are the most beautiful words in the English language, I think. if you're an idea person and want to make things happen, people who will help, people who will collaborate. So she gets credit for doing that, and also creating awareness through the women's poetry listserv. I think it was called WAMPO. I don't know if that still exists. I was never a member of it. But that changed the audience from just being my people to other people and people internationally participating. And we were kind of stunned by the response to it in the first year and decided to continue it. In fact, many people wanted to continue it throughout the year, but you find that you can't keep it going 365 days. But to create a season, somebody, I believe it was Judy Jensen in Texas, who said postcard season is like a season of the year for me, like the holiday season or like the springtime. It has its own flavor, and that rang true very deeply with me, and I thought that's how it has to be. It has to be its own season. Then, for its 10th anniversary, Ina Roy Federman and Judy Kleinberg and we curated 56 Days of August. Now, it gets its title because the Poetry Postcard Fest, we used to put open registration on the 4th of July, give people their lists on the 5th, and then on the 6th, they had till the end of August to create their cards. And so we counted that as 56 days. The way it works now, the lists go out on the 4th of July, so it's more like 58 days, but the figure 56 days is stuck. And that was at its 10th anniversary, or 10th year of practice, and now we're at year 19, so that was only about halfway through the practice. And it's evolved since then, and so that's how it got started.
Lovely. Thank you. You mentioned Bernadette Mayer, and one of the ways I know the fest has evolved is the channeling of the poetic energy that you build during the 56 or 58 days of really prioritizing the poetic practice. One of the ways you channel that energy is into a day song, which was inspired by Bernadette Mayer's Midwinter Day and Pierre Joris's Canto Diurno, among other sources of inspiration. So how does the Postcard Fest help you with that practice? And what other ways do you see the energy generated by writing 31 postcard poems coming into your life?
Well, first of all, may he rest in peace, Pierre Joris, because he just died a couple of weeks ago. And it was Adelia's reading of his poem Canto Diurno and bringing that to my attention, and the fact that she wrote a day song. As soon as she saw that Pierre was doing it, she had to do it. And I thought that's a great exercise. I'm always looking for exercises for the people who take the online workshops, now being called Poetics as Cosmology and Life as Rehearsal for the Poem. And so I developed an exercise, and I thought this is a perfect thing to do after the Postcard Fest, because for 56 days or 31 poems or more, some people send out bonus poems, you have a spatial restriction, and it's about this size of a postcard. Although some postcards I send out are larger than that, and we can have fun with that. In fact, I've got stuff to make postcards with hanging around. Like this could be 2 cards. I just got to cut it in half and maybe use this as the decorative side and put the poem on this side. But I had been engaged in a practice September 1st of doing an afterword. Here's what I wrote about. Here's what I went through. And I posted about it. And they got extensive. I started writing about every poem that I wrote. And when the opportunity to do the day song came, I thought, you had 31 poems with a spatial restriction. Now it's time to use a temporal restriction, which is what the day song is. You've got a 24-hour period to write and see what you can do in one day. And if you get stuck, you can go back to any one of those 31 poems and graft off of that. It's a term that McClure used to start with something, and he grafted off his own work, portions of Dolphin Skull 3 or 4 times, going with a part of Dolphin Skull and then grafting off. And he called them graftings, 1, 2, and 3, and what have you. So, it goes back in part to an exercise that McClure got from Jack Kerouac called alluvials, a geological term from material that's washed from above, like in a river or something, alluvial. And so when you get stuck and you're writing spontaneously, you go back a few lines up or to the beginning of the poem, you start reading, and it works so well to remind you of something you'd thought about but didn't go with, and it's a great way to get that moment back on track, to get that flow back on track. So grafting is something that can be done for the day song. A multi-decade research project is what Ed Sanders called things, and maybe it's not multi-decade for a day song, but there's research involved, and you can research a particular topic and write about it, research a particular person. There's a technique that Joanne Kiger used. She wrote about Madame Blavatsky in a chapbook. It's in her collected poems, and basically she read a book by Blavatsky and then extracted the poetry from it, at least what she thought was the poetry, or the luminous details, or the images, or the ironies, or the fascinating facts about it. And she created this beautiful little chapbook, and that's a technique you can use even with newspaper articles. That's something that Rattle magazine has, Poets Respond. So you read a newspaper article and you write something, in a sense, maybe the essence of the issue, or the essence of the issue plus your own associations with that particular topic. So these are all techniques to write from, and all things that could be part of a day poem.
What does it feel like to receive a poetry postcard in the mail?
It's always a gift, to be able to go to the mailbox, and it's becoming kind of a rare experience. When I was growing up, when the phone rang, the kids all raced to answer it, pick it up off the wall and say hello. And, that experience doesn't exist anymore. You get a call and you just go in your pocket and you answer it. Similar with mail, although we're still getting some mail, but most of the stuff we get in the mail is advertising. Fishing, quite often, too. So to go to the mailbox and check your mail, and to have someone wrote a poem specifically for you and send it to your house, it's a really beautiful thing. So no matter how accomplished it is, no matter how deep someone went into their own mind, no matter how much poetry they read beforehand and use that to create a gesture, it's a gesture from a human being, and it's a beautiful thing. And it's a person you're likely to be sending a poem to if they're on your list. So it's already the beginning of a dialogue, which is where community comes in. M. Scott Peck says community requires that. It requires people being able to feel vulnerable. And what could make you more vulnerable than to send a stranger or someone you barely know, or just a name on a list, something that comes from the depth of your being? So these are the building blocks of community, and that's part of the intention of the Poetry Postcard Fest, is to create poetry community, to make connections for people. And many connections have been made.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because like I read in the introduction, the Poetry Postcard Fest is an experiment in spontaneity and community building. And going a step further with community building, you've often referred to the Poetry Postcard Fest as a peace project. That feels like a step beyond just community building. Could you illuminate a little bit on that?
I think the person who said it best is Jason Worth. And there's a page on our site, CascadiaPoeticslab.org, called Jason Worth, Tetsuza and Jason Worth on Splab Ahimsa. We were known as the Seattle Poetics Lab when he said this. And he said, when you're writing poetry, part of the poetry is the craft of it. That's a necessary but not sufficient condition. You're also getting into your mind and experiencing your mind at a very deep level. And that mind, as you experience it more deeply, is not in a vacuum. It's now and here. It's rooted in the socioeconomic and ecological conditions that make it possible. It's rooted in those conditions now and here. And he likens the writing of postcard poems as a spiritual exercise. And he says what we're trying to get at is a deep bioregional awakening and conversion. In a way, we're trying for something like a spiritual revolution. And that poetry is not just an interesting thing you can do, it's a fundamental exercise of being here in a less harmful way. And he used the Buddhist term ahimsa, a deep ahimsa, a deep practice of non-harming and cultivation. And he says, it's all connected. How could the stakes be higher? We're going to live or die by how we come down on these issues going forward. And I think the recent elections in 2024 showed us that the stakes are higher now. The things that we took for granted are now being questioned. Do we have money for weather forecasting? Do we have the money we need to do that properly, especially in a time where the climate is in chaos? So the stakes have gotten higher since 2021, January 2021, when Jason made these comments. So writing a poem, being creative, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, reaching out to another person which, you may have not much of a connection at first. These are all gallant acts. These are all peaceful acts, unless you send them something and that's criticizing their politics, or can be perceived as criticizing their politics or their lifestyle or their background. That kind of thing would be anti-community. And we've had a couple of instances of that, which we've had to overcome. And I think it was Sharon Thiessen who was quoting Phyllis Webb, the late Salt Spring Island poet, who said, the best response to a poem is another poem. And, maybe it's best when somebody writes you something you disagree with or find offensive or something, to write them a poem and to demonstrate to them what would be the right way to accomplish that act.
Yeah. As you're talking, I'm hearing just many of the things keep coming up again and again. It's sort of a synthesis of all these various parts of how you live your life. So it's the Postcard Fest, it can be a really big part of a cosmology. Would you agree?
Yes, to be creative, to be in the moment. These are all parts of how I think humans have to be in the world. I think humans are here on Earth School to learn how to be noble human beings, how to do no harm, how to be kind, how to find compassion, even for people we don't like. There are lots of opportunities now for, and I see it on Twitter, FAFO, right? What is it? The leopards, face-eating leopards. The leopards ate my face, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, that's funny, but how are we going to build something in this country, and what values are we going to imbue it with that says, you voted for Trump and you got fired, and there's a place for you to do the work that you're meant to do in your community. And so to go to a deeper place, I think, is important. So yes, creativity is a part of being here in a very deep way. I think you find that as people get older, if they don't have a creative practice, they suffer from it. I know many stories of people who a month after they retire, get sick, die, and that kind of thing. It's like, why am I here? Are you there to take a job that you may or may not like or may not get satisfaction out of? Or does it just provide enough income for you to have fancy dinners? You know, are you making a
Right.
change? Are you making a difference in the world? You
Right.
know, and many people who have jobs can make a difference in the world when they're not working. Wallace Stevens was an insurance executive.
Right.
William Carlos Williams was a doctor. I don't know how Joanne Kiger made her money teaching annually at Naropa in the summer and doing other lectures, but she managed to make a life as a poet. So, you know, there are many different ways to accomplish this, but the goal is to be a more noble human being. And I think that writing poetry should lead you to that. Michael McClure said something very interesting in his introduction to 3 poems, which is the first book of his I read, and which changed my life. And he said, if poetry and science cannot change one's life, they're meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah. And it starts, as you've said many times, and what writing a postcard can help you do, right? How poetry can help you find meaning is by directing your attention to the hyper-local, right? The fern that's by your foot, the tree that's right next to you, in addition to the people with whom you share the neighborhood, the river that runs by your house, the creek, Mapes Creek, the salmon that want to live in that creek, the lake out here, and the ducks and geese that are quacking out there right now while we're talking. And then along with science, you were talking about some ways to find inspiration to write all these postcards. Well, what if you look around and you look up the scientific name of the plant that's right by your feet, and you go from there?
You go from there with potentially the etymology, or what associations you get from that. You go from there by having a relationship with that madrone tree over there, or that creek over there, or that lake over there, or the inhabitants of it. The coots aren't here in postcard season, so they don't get in many postcards if they're written during postcard season. Although
Right.
some people continue to send out postcards after, or end up being late, or want to respond to a beautiful poem that they got.
Yeah.
So, yes, and just the act of sitting down and writing spontaneously, you're connecting with forces deeper than yourself, which conspire to bring certain things to your attention. William Carlos Williams says, I write to figure out what I think. And people have had that experience. You're able to connect with more potent energies when you can be open to them, when you have an open stance. And, you know, that's part of why we designed the Postcard Fest the way we did. We'd love it if people could just learn to relax a little bit and write a poem right on the card, and not cook it up in your pocket journal first, you know. That doesn't mean you can't look at your pocket journal and look at some things.
Graft.
You graft from it, or it reminds you of things, or it gives you images. Speaking of drafts, draft from Goose Couple's Liftoff bends the Saturday Zazen incense stream, you know, for example. So that might show up. Rabbit at our feet during morning Zazen. There's no monkey mind there. Maybe a rabbit mind. You know, so I have my pocket journal with my American sentences in it, and with other notations. And, you know, if I go and sit by the creek, you know, I'll notice things, and, you know, those things invariably end up in poems. An eagle sitting above me for 45 minutes, watching the same scene that I am, although he has a better view from up here.
And a better eye.
And a better eye.
What are some things you always try to include on a postcard? For example, the recipient's name.
Start with their name, and then I put the date and the time and the place. I try and do that. What date is it? I mean, that's marking the Dharma position, right?
Absolutely.
What date it is, where I'm writing from. I don't always write from here. If I travel during August, one time I went to Puebla, Mexico, so I noted that they were written in Puebla. And I often write with epigraphs, not always, but it's a way to saturate myself in another writer. Nate Mackey one time, Denise Levertov one time, people from a an anthology of Mexican poetry translated into English one time. So often, Barry McKinnon, I think that was last year, maybe the year before. Barry McKinnon, no, it was last summer. Last summer we went to his memorial, so it might have been the summer before that. I was including a lot of Barry stuff. I still have things that I was attaching onto the cards. These little notes from Rob McLennan's periodicity journal. He was giving out sort of little bookmark things, and I was gluing these to the cards. And then that'll be the next thing I do is once the poem is created, then I'll sort of create the image, and that way I know the content, so it's kind of like a reverse ekphrastic. I can know maybe what images to put on there, and sometimes they're just images based on stamps, ink stamps that I have, or things like that. So yeah, those are the things that usually go on a card when I'm doing them. Last year I typed up all but I think 2 of my postcards, so I'll get out the typewriter, the Royal Classic, and I'll cut a sheet in half. I've got some great paper too for this coming fest. I got all kinds of colored paper, stuff like this. So man, that's at least 4 right there. 4 pretty good size too.
Yeah.
You know. So to have a different color is going to be a new wrinkle, but somebody gave us a bunch of. They're clearing out their scrapbook practice or something. He said, "You want these?" And we said, "Yes, we'll take them."
Yeah, the fest, I have found this as well in terms of the collage and stamping and the reverse side of the card can be, and as well the poetry can be an exercise in using what you have at your disposal, finding things, being given things that are in the moment, that are in that Dharma position, and so you put it on the postcard, and that adds to the character, it adds to what you're able to share about your life. Because if you have this paper that came from, and you don't have to write out the whole story for the person who's getting the card, but that energy is there and becomes part of the card, that you got this paper from this person who's your neighbor or whomever, and that becomes part of the card, is really a special piece of this. Or you get the card from somewhere you travel, you know, you might get one of those 25-cent postcards in Puebla, Mexico, and and send that, and the fact that you were there, that you got that card there, is still part of the energy.
As are luminous details. When you write specific thing, whether it be this tablecloth, or this box of sake, or this bookmark from periodicities, or whatever it might be, it has a specific resonance and frequency and says something. It says something regardless of whether people know what it is or know anything about it. It'll have an effect. And also the act of improvisation. I mean, I've done this poetry postcard exercise, and I say, just write on the card. We don't make you show what you've written. We won't make you read it. And some people are like, yeah, right. And then they just write in their journal or on a piece of paper and don't write on the card, and they save the card for later. Well, take a chance. We can improvise. We improvise when we drive. If somebody swerves into our lane, we stop or we pull away. It's not like we don't say, hey, wait a minute, this is my lane, get out of it, whatever. Maybe you say that after, but in the moment you act.
With a few choice cuss words, perhaps.
Or gestures.
Or gestures.
My dad would say when we were young, I've got 2 words for you, and they're not let's dance, was his line. And maybe that gets into a poem. Lines your dad used to say when you were a kid. But when we take a walk, we improvise. We decide, we're going to go this way. Oh, there's someone menacing coming down the street. Maybe it's time to cross the street. Usually they cross the street when they see me coming. And I'm like, I'm not menacing, but you can't say that, So improvising is part of our daily lives. And to make it part of your writing practice, I think enriches your life. It deepens your connection with your own intuition. Your own intuition is very helpful especially if you can discern it from your irrational fear, not rational fear. That menacing person walking down the street, might be looking for trouble. So is it an irrational fear? Is it a fear? Is it an intuition? I think the Postcard Fest and the practice of doing this and the practice of writing spontaneously leads you to a deepening of that connection, whatever the source of intuition is, whatever the source of imagination is. And it could be your ancestors, it could be that poetry lineage that you're connected to, or as Ronald Johnson said, imbued with a lineaged clarity, which I think is such a beautiful thing. It could be the people who've been in this building before, or the people who were here camped out on the lake before there was a building here. The resonances of all those people. Rupert Sheldrake calls it morphic resonance or morphogenetic resonance. How the walls have a mind, they have a history, and we can connect with that. I had a teacher who said that mountains are like libraries because they've absorbed all the energetics that have been happening around here, and they have on some level a memory of it. That doesn't mean that a mountain could tweet about it necessarily, but it's accessible in different ways, and we can learn how to access that when we learn to have the mind of place, like David Abram talks about mind as something we participate in. The Buddhists and other spiritual traditions have talked about this, that mind is not my possession, but it's something you and I engage in. And I think when we begin to make that shift in our lives, when we can understand the mind of the creek, or the mind of the coots, or the mind of the eagle who's hunting the coots, or the mind of the madrone tree, or whatever, it begins to have an effect on our lives and change them. And I believe it's becoming essential to engage in that mind because we're so disconnected from it in the West, whatever that was, and seems to be falling apart thanks to the efforts of El Caudillo.
El Caudillo, indeed. And so the fest can help people practice this to get engaged with the mind that goes beyond the self, to get the ego out of the way and tap into those local surroundings. But people are sometimes nervous to do that, fearful to do that, because they haven't had a lot of practice in their lives before. And I've had that experience a couple times where I'm telling somebody, you'd be really interested in this, you would really get a lot out of this. And they come back with something like, I don't know, I'm not a poet really, or I don't know about, the collage thing, or whatever. And I say, I promise it's super accessible. There's no, you're not getting graded on the quality of the poem here, or of the collage, or anything like that. It's just a way to help you deepen your own personal practice. But what might you say to somebody who is nervous to engage in the mind that goes beyond their own self?
Well, try it. I mean, you don't know what something's like until you try it. If you do the Postcard Fest, then write 31 poems. You don't have to do it again next year. There's nothing saying you're committed to it. But, it's like anything else. People are like, I don't know about raw fish. I don't think I can eat raw fish. I don't know. Well, you know what? You can go to a sushi bar and eat broiled eel. I guess that's probably not a place you're going to go if they don't want to eat raw fish. Eel, yuck! My daughter said, is it going to shock you? Electric eel. So, it's a matter of having the guts to try something. And then, trusting the folks who are running it. And we've carved out for ourselves a rather difficult position to welcome people who want to try it, but to also encourage them and allow for experience for there to be depth. And people have to be open, and they have to be humble, and they have to feel like they can trust what's going on. So the way you describe it, saying there are no grades for it, is true. There's no popo. There's no police for the Poetry Postcard Fest, which some people still call Popo. Black people call the police Popo in many places, so try and stay away from that. But there's no Poetry Postcard police who are going to say, you know what, this poem was horrible, or you took this poem from someone else and wrote it down. It wasn't a true experience of who you are, so you're banned from the Postcard Fest. That doesn't happen. You don't know about something unless you try it.
Yeah. And you were talking about how, this Western, whatever, that kind of means in our time right now, we're watching it kind of fall slowly. Meanwhile, we have this attention fracking going on. Social media, they want every 6-second bite they can cut out of your life because that's an opportunity for them to advertise to you, collect your data, among other things. And so taking the time out for yourself to write a postcard, to really engage deeply with yourself, can be an antidote to that in a lot of ways, would you say?
Without question. Gloria Di Gaetano, whom I interviewed a couple of times, a media literacy activist and a woman who has worked very much. She founded the Parent Coaching Institute and very concerned with all the violence happening, the massacres happening in schools, and found the link between violent video games, which, you play violent video games, and yes, it's a little blip on a screen, but what you're doing is training yourself to kill it, to terminate it, to wipe it out. There was this one shooter in Kentucky, I think it was, who shot a bunch of people up at a high school, and it was one shot there, one shot there, one shot there, all above the waist. And why is that? Because they were practicing on a video game where you got extra points for shooting in the head. So there's a definite connection between the two things. So how do we cultivate the non-harmful side of things? I think that's really critical, and really going forward, especially in this era when so much is up for grabs, so much is chaotic. The West is, whatever the quote-unquote West is, may be no more after this. So what emerges in its place? What values do we have moving forward? I think these are all really essential questions, and these kinds of things can be tackled through the postcards. Find out what we think about it by writing about it. Something very interesting in the 50s, that Charles Olson had this phrase, polis is eyes. Now, why did he write that? Obviously it sounded good to him. Obviously he was interested in the polis. He used that as a phrase for community, and meaning the very best of a community. How can this settlement, this area, this town, provide equitably for the needs of all its inhabitants? And he used the phrase, polis is eyes. And now we have eyes which are being sought after, which are in a way being hunted, at least the attention from those eyes. How many clicks do you get? What can you do to get people to click on your thing? What is the word clickbait about? All these things, and of course Olson wrote about being sold out by this music, S-I-C-K, being sold out by advertising interests, being sold out by people whose only goal is to take money out of our pocket and not giving us something in return of value. So how do you build the other side of that? Instead of all these notifications and distractions that we get, the phone going off in our pocket and having to attend to that and all these other things, how do we begin to carve out a space that is the antithesis of that? And certainly the poem is, especially the postcard poem, where it's only this big. I mean, 20 minutes, half an hour, it shouldn't take much longer than that once you have everything in place. Of course, there are experiences that you have, and creating a setting that takes time, but when you sit down and to do it, it doesn't take much longer than that. So, and then you begin to, in the words of a workshop participant writing the day song, Lorraine Martinook, she said, I had this experience of myself, which is the highest praise that you can give any writing exercise or any workshop, is how can you have a deep experience of yourself? You know, there are a lot of places where you can get that, but it doesn't seem to be the priority right now, with people trying to hack your consciousness to take something out of your pocket, hack your attention. And I heard a story of friends whose teenage daughter has separation anxiety when she doesn't have her phone in her hand. Traveled to a foreign country for a conference and stayed in the hotel room looking at the phone because they were so addicted to this device. Having a telephone, having a cell phone is affecting the physiology of people who are always like this, affecting attention spans, which have been going down in the last 20 or 30 years since the MTV era and before. Attention spans getting shorter and shorter and shorter. At what time do they just kind of hit a certain place and go, and they're gone? I mean, it seems funny, but it's a real thing to create. How do we maintain attention on the things that are real, on the things that matter, on the things that affect our life and our well-being in our communities and the people around us? Well, we're fighting back in an ahimsa-laden way, and that is to do no harm, to write a poem from our deepest selves with a feeling of compassion and community. And I think it's the front line of the war against those who engage in attention fracking.
I had this experience once where, this experience of myself in a way, where I was out by the beach writing a postcard poem, and there was this crow up in the tree above me, and I had this experience of seeing the world and myself and all the people passing by on the beach and all the litter and all the gulls and other crows around, and a few kinds of ducks surely going by as well, all seeing it from the crow's point of view up in the top of that tree. And that's what the postcard poem was about that day. So you talk about this experience of self, and it's remarkable that we really do have the power to manifest these kinds of experiences for ourselves if we choose to pay attention to the postcard poem for 30 minutes or an hour a day. And that, like we were talking about, the energy spilling out into the rest of our lives, that can be the beginning of a deeper attention that you carry with you throughout the whole day, throughout a whole week, throughout a whole month, throughout a whole lifetime.
And animals can be our teachers. And that crow lives on, that you were referencing. By just thinking about that crow and that experience, and by sort of creating that image in my mind of a crow in a tree by a beach, I'm picturing West Seattle, that the energy of that particular crow lives on. And to be able to share perspective with something outside of the human world expands our own experience. Alfred North Whitehead said, when you deeply engage with things in your environment, you're prehending them. So how do we create a prehension that is on that level? I really believe our own health and wellness is based on the capacity to take in more than ourselves, to have empathy for those and living things, the more than human world that's outside of ourselves, and to understand our proper role in it. I think actual human health is dependent on that capacity.
Because it's part of our health is part of the health of the earth, that we are a small part of this larger organism. It's just like, if your lymph nodes are not healthy in your body, soon it's going to be your ears and your heart and your lungs that are not healthy, and it can start at any point in the organism. So it's important we take care of ourselves and take care of our neighbors, human and non.
Buckminster Fuller called it Spaceship Earth, and it is cutting through space. going around and cutting through space and on an angle. How do you do the axis of the planet, right?
Something like that.
Coming back now. So yes, it's absolutely true. And when you begin to understand that, something in you shifts. When you begin to understand you live in a bioregion, and the boundaries of that bioregion may or may not be the legal boundaries of the nation that you live in. When you understand that you do live in a bioregion, it creates a different sort of tenor in your own life, and it has ramifications, positive ramifications, I believe.
What's a postcard you received that really stood out to you?
You know, the postcards I get from people like Tim Mateer and Abaya Thomas and Colette Dutton, those are some of the ones that are just the most beautiful ones I get. Mary Beth Friesen, Ingrid Bruck writes haiku. Her mother was at age 94 writing postcard poems. I'll never forget this whale. She drew the whale on it. I keep the postcards here in a file. For example, what is this? I think this is 2022 here. 2023 here, is that right? 2023. I usually put the... Look at that. Look at that one, how beautiful this is. That's from Colette. That was very cool. This is, I believe this is Mary Beth. No, this is Carla Schaefer. This here. I think this is a Tim Mateer one. He's got the word hallucination on it.
Ah.
Yeah, that's a story there I can tell you as well. Look at this one. Say nothing of his supernatural skill in bed. That unmasks him. I think this was sent in an envelope because it doesn't have a stamp on it. I wonder who sent that. Yeah, so, I go through them. I think they probably knew I had a rabbit. Who was this? Yeah, this is from Ingrid. She knew we have a rabbit. Some people collage old cars, old cards.
Old cards with old cars on them.
Yeah. Providence, Rhode Island. So yeah, these are the things. I've got my 2024 missed file. They're around here somewhere, so that's why I'm going to 2023. Historic Gettysburg. Handmade, hand-painted card, I believe. From Canada. Yeah. So yeah, that's very simple one.
Frida.
Yeah. So that gives you some idea of how I value them.
Thank you for sharing those. And before you send each card out, I know that you take some kind of scan or picture of it to keep for yourself. Would you mind sharing a poem or two?
Yeah, I've been engaged in a exchange in and out of the Poetry Postcard Fest with Art Tooley from Yakima area. He doesn't live in Yakima proper. There's a town outside of Yakima that he lives in. Hold on a second, it'll come to me. Toppenish.
There it is.
And I was inspired the other day, and I created this poem, maybe it's about a month ago, and it has a long epigraph. I was looking at Substack and saw this epigraph that was just so potent. I thought I have to include the whole thing. And I typed it, and I typed it on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and put it on the back of a cereal box, some cereal that I got at Costco, which is very tasty. I have to keep remembering to go to Costco for the cereal. I didn't go to Costco for a while because you think, wait, I got to wait till I get in the chips to go spend $300 or $400.
Right. Yeah.
Well, I finally went, and I'm like, I remember this cereal. And Art doesn't always call himself Art Tooley. For example, one of his pseudonyms was Mr. Serenity. So the first thing I did was elevate him to Dr. Serenity. And you know what? I didn't put the date on this one, but I have. I can check back. It was February 22nd. So, Dr. Serenity, Toppenish, Washington. America's decline is not solely Trump's doing. Rather, this is the inevitable consequence of decades of Western economic and military dominance built on short-term exploitation, corruption, and global predation. Trump's role is to mask this systemic unraveling with populist rhetoric while enabling the true power holders, the transnational, financial, and corporate elite, or what Bolson calls the a-national owners and controllers of global financial capital, to consolidate their wealth, power, and control as America is hollowed out and broken. Marianne Williamson said that to Daniel Pinchbeck, and I wrote, a-national, meaning without nation art, making the case in Cascadia for the post-national. So many nations, so little time, he said, in the era of free Leonard Peltier. He said, striving for what Ronald Johnson called a lineaged clarity. Just searching for information from the air, Joanna'd say. Peltier, Johnson, Kiger, Brenda, Wanda, Bernie, Malcolm, Martin, Dogan, Madame Blavatsky, Cassius, picking my lineage out of the thick Cascadia lakeside clouds, as she makes meaty rutabaga plans, root and baggy, lump, bunch, just letting this seafoam green royal classic fancy dance atop the box of Morning's Summit, aka Fuel for the Revolution. Hang in there, Paul. And I put a Tenzing Momo sticker on them.
Nice.
Got some stamps on there.
Hermosa. Beautiful.
And the cereal box is Morning Summit.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good for cereal and postcards.
I think so. Big postcard, though.
Big postcards.
I think I put 3 stamps on it. I hope he got it. I think he did, because there was a little burst of activity a few days after that.
Very good. If not art, here's your poem.
That's right. I could scan it and send it to you.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to sit here on Lake Washington and talk about how the Postcard Fest can help us move forward. Really appreciate your time.
I appreciate all the preparation you did, your attention, and your kindness as well.